Evening. Hope you're all doing well. Today we are learning Maseches Zevachim Daf Nun Tes, and we're starting two lines from the bottom on Nun Ches Amud Beis. Yesterday we learned a Mishnah. Maybe I should say we relearned a Mishnah from Maseches Tamid, and the Mishnah Maseches Tamid was on its face not so difficult, but it caused for a conversation in logistics that was difficult. The Mishnah Maseches Tamid says that the Ma'arach Shniya, which was on top of the outer Mizbeach, had to be on top of the outer Mizbeach. So let's say this was the top of the Mizbeach. We said that it was near the southwest corner, so toward the south of the Beis Hamikdash, the south side of the Mizbeach, with the Ulam being right to our east. Yeah, right. No, east, right to our west. And therefore, the Gemara says it had to be there, but it had to be 4 amos moved forward. That was what we were discussing yesterday. That is where the Ma'arach Shniya was put. We spoke about two Mahalchim. One Mahalach was that really the Mizbeach was in the north, in the northern half. One Mahalach was really the Mizbeach was 50-yard line. The midline of the Mizbeach was the midline of the doors of the Heichal and the Ulam. And here we're going to see a third Shita, but this third Shita is going to start with a complicating factor of where the shiur was located. So it says the Gemara as follows. Two lines from the bottom on Nun Ches Amud Beis, says the Gemara, the Rav Shravya Omar Ha'amani, who is the author of our Mishnah, that the Ma'arach Shniya is 4 amos off of the southwest corner. So says the Gemara, Rabbi Yossi Haglili. But as mentioned, this Rabbi Yossi Haglili is not really talking about our case. This is going to take us a half an hour to unpack this answer. So let's see if we can understand Rabbi Yossi Haglili. Titania, Rabbi Yossi Haglili Omer. Mitoch shene'emar, in regards to the shiur, the Torah says, "V'nasatos ha-shiur ben ol moedu vein hamizbeach." The shiur was supposed to be between the Oel Moed and the Mizbeach. That's a very, very difficult location. There's a lot going on over there, but that's where the shiur was located. The Gomer. And then, and there's missing words here, it should say, V'kasuv echad Omer, that another pasuk says the following, Ves Mizbach ha'olah v'chulei. So therefore, the Gemara says that we have these competing psukim. Pasuk number 1 indicates that the shiur needs to be between the Mizbeach and the Ulah. Pasuk number 2 says not like that. What's the drush on Pasuk 2, top of Nun Tes Amud Aleph? Mizbeach bepesach ohel moed. V'lo shiur bepesach ohel moed. We're not allowed to have the shiur interrupt, to be mafsik between the Mizbeach and the doors of the Ulam. The Lifnei Hashem that we were looking for yesterday with the Ma'aracha, you cannot have both the Ma'aracha Shniya and along with that, you cannot have the Mizbeach. The Mizbeach has to be a straight shot to the doors of the Heichal and the Ulam. So Heichan Hayonasna, what did they do with the shiur? So the Brisa, in the name of Rabbi Yossi Haglili, says the following cryptic two lines, which we're going to be working on for a little bit. Bein ha'ulam ulam mizbeach. Yes, the shiur does need to be between the ulam and the mizbeach. However, mashuch kima klape hadarim. But we need to slide it down to the southern side, past the south side of the mizbeach. So if this is the mizbeach here, then the shiur has to be past the end line of the mizbeach, but opposite still the ulam in some way, shape, and form. We don't know what that is yet. We're going to learn that now. But that is what the Gemara says is the shita Rabbi Yossi Haglili. So the Gemara says 4 lines down, my kasavar. What is that unique shita of Rabbi Yossi Haglili? Ikasavar, that kule mizbeach bedarom koi. If you want to say that the mizbeach is fully in the south, and the brisa that Rabbi Yossi Haglili taught teaches that it's mashach kima, why does he have to say that it's mashach kima to the south? You're already in the south. What else are you doing? Says the Gemara, Nukme mikosel heichal uledara ikasar mizbeach bedaram kai. If you want to say that the mizbeach is in the south, then nukme mikosel heichal uledara ben ulam la mizbeach. You're givaldik. Then you could literally put it in between the mizbeach and the ulam. You don't need to make it south of the mizbeach. If the mizbeach is all south, you're good. You don't need the brisa to tell you to move the shiur any further south. V'hinami, even if you want to say that kasavar k'tusha seichal v'ulam chadahi, it doesn't matter. There still is space if the whole mizbeach is on the south of the midline. Nukme mikosel ulam uladar bevein ulam lemizbeach. There still is space to put the ulam to put the kior, between the mizbech and the ulam without blocking the doors. So again, in this iteration, we also don't need Rabbi Yossi Aglili to say that the kior was to the south of the mizbeach. And inami kasavar chetzio b'tzafon v'chetzio b'darim. If you want to say, and this was a version we saw yesterday, if you want to say that perhaps the mizbeach was sitting midline with the doors of the heichal and the ulam, well then nukme mikosel heichal u'darim b'ulam mizbeach. Still, even if you do that, you have 16 amos in the southern side. You don't need to put the kior beyond that southern wall of the mizbech. Everything fits perfectly. V'inamika savar, even if you want to hold that kedushas ulam heichal chadahi, doesn't matter, because even though the ulam doors are wider and the midline is now, let's say the midline of the 20 amos of the doorway is now 10 amos of the bottom half of the mizbech, 10 amos of the 16 are in the south, but I still have 6 left to be nukma mikosa ulam uladar bin ulam mizbech. So these two versions, version number 1 of the Gemara, in trying to understand Rabbi Yossi Aglili, that perhaps the Mizbech was in the south. Version number 2 of the Gemara, that it's halfway line. Neither of them warrant the line in the Brisa that Rabbi Yossi Aglili said that the Kior was south of the Mizbech. So Ella says the Gemara 1/3 of the way down on Nun Testament Aleph. Elalav, we misunderstood. Mishum de Ksavar, Kula Mizbech B'Tzafon. Pashut, it must be that Rabbi Yossi Aglili holds that the entire Mizbech was in the north. But you couldn't put the kior right there, because if the entire mizbeach was in the north, that means that the bottom of the mizbeach was midline with the doors. And for the next 5 amos, if you follow the heichal measurements, or the next 10 amos, if you follow the ula measurements, well, all of those are lifnei Hashem. So you have to move it. You have to move it south. That makes sense. The next line and a half from the word ki until the last word on the next line of Ulam Yizbeach, at least that's how I have the phraseologies, they're not found in the Gemara, they're not correct. We're going to follow on the side. So it says in the Hagos V'Tzionim, V'nukme bein heichal ulet safon. Why can't you just put it in the safon? What's wrong? Why do you have to move it to the south? Put it in the safon. So the Gemara responds still on the side here. Kasavar kedushas heichal v'ulam chada. You're not allowed to put it right there because the bottom half of the mizbeach is still opposite doors. Says the Gemara, yeah, but there's still much more space there. Only up to 10 amos of the 32 are blocked by doors of Lifnei Hashem. And back in the Gemara, the next line, that's great. So then move 10 amos off the bottom of the mizbeach that's fully in the north. And for the next 16 amos, go do whatever you want. Just go put the kior there, more than 16 amos. For the next 22 amos, you have a lot of space to put the kior. Why are you doing what you're doing? It says the Gemara, Amar Kratzfona. We have the extra letter hey in this pasuk. What does that teach you? Shehei tzafon panui mikelim. Oh, we have a drasha. Some of the Mefarshim point out that the word safona has the root word in it of penei. Clean it out. Keep it clean. Panui. Which is a nice play on words. But the pashtus of the Gemara as we read it is just that there's an extra hey. Good. So says the Gemara, very good. That's the shita now that we've explained. Now we're done with this third answer. We wanted to know the positioning of the Mizbeach. So now we know Rabbi Yossi Aglili holds, based on the Mishnayos that deal with Kior, that the Mizbeach was in the Tzafon. And Montana de Palag Rabbi Yossi Aglili. Who argues with Rabbi Yossi Aglili? Who holds that the Mizbech was not in the north? Says the Gemara, Rabbi Lazar ben Yaakov. Titania, Rabbi Lazar ben Yaakov Omer. When it says Tzfona, it's not only Sheyheit Safon Panui Mikelim, but Ve'afilu Mina Mizbech. He held that the Mizbech was not allowed to be placed in the north. So from the midline of the doors of the Ulam and the Heichal, nothing goes north. No Mizbech is allowed there, meaning it's probably puzzle, which is pretty fascinating. Good. End of sugya. What do we conclude? There's a machlokes tanaim as to where the mizbeach should go. We've seen 3 shitas. All 3 of them are presented in the Gemara: south, north, and middle. Halfway down, the Gemara switches gears just a drop. Amar Rav mizbeach shenifkam. What if there was a mizbeach that was damaged to the point that it's no longer kosher? So kol hakachim shenishchetu sham sulim. If there were animals that were shechted on that pasal mizbeach, all the korbanos are pasal. You have to go back and bring them. No kapara, no zrika, nothing. You're done. And this is interesting. Rav says, "Umikra haya biadenu ushechachnuhu." We used to talk about a pasuk in regards to this din, and we all forgot it. What troubled me about this is that you know Tanakh by heart. What pasuk don't you remember?
Rush.
Must be. So let's see what happens. Says the Gemara, Ki Salik Rav Kahana, when Rav Kahana came up to Eretz Yisrael, Ashkeche l'Reb Shimon b'Rebbe. Reb Shimon, the son of Rebbe, he was about the same age as Rav. Remember that Rav learned from Rebbe. So this was like a classmate. Reb Shimon b'Rebbe was about the same age as Rav. Teka Amar Mishum Rebbe Shmuel b'Rebbe Yossi, Minayin l'Mizbeach, Shenivkam, Shekol HaKodshim, Shenishchedu Sham Psulim. How do we know that if there were animals that were shechted on a mizbech that are puzzle, that those animals are puzzle too? Shenemar v'zavachta alav es olosecha ve'es shilamecha. David, exactly like you said. The pasuk says you should shecht on it olos and shlamim. Says the Gemara, what a weird pasuk. V'chi alav atazovech. Is that our normal place to shecht? No, that's where we burn things, but that's not where we shecht things. We did discuss in the last Mishnah if it's kosher, but that's not our normal shechita place. Why is the pasuk phrased this way? Ella, what it means is that v'zavachta alav, you can only shecht on a mizbeach that is full. Says the Gemara, el kshu shalim, v'lo kshu chasav. Omar, so then, after hearing this, what was the conclusion? Hainu kra the ishtamit leila Rav. This was the pasuk that Rav forgot. Namely, the pasuk has this very subtle indication that something else is going on, and it is in fact the drasha. So that's Rav's shita, is that if the animal was shechted over a non-kosher mizbeach, the mizbeach was really pasul, it was chaser. The halacha is that the animals are pasul. The Rabbi Yochanan, 2/3 of the way down, a little bit more, he holds Amar echad zev echad zepsulin. I argue with you in two cases. I actually argue with you in one case. I agree in your case that if it's chaser and you do a shchita on a chaser mizbech, it's pasul. But he says more. He says, if I set aside an animal, a makdish an animal, and then the mizbech becomes pasul, and then the mizbech is fixed again, the animal that you were makdish originally is still pasul. Why? B'mai pligi. What are Rav and Rav Yochanan arguing about? So Rav Savar, Ba'alei Chaim Eina Nidachin. The fact that your mizbeach was broken yesterday, after I was makdish my animal, doesn't matter because Ba'alei Chaim are not nidachin. You don't like ruin an animal because I was makdish the animal, the mizbeach was damaged. They brought in the workers overnight and it's ready by morning. Rav says no problem. Ba'alei Chaim eno nidachin. However, Rabbi Yochanan savar Ba'alei Chaim nidachin, and therefore, if I makdish an animal on Monday, the mizbeach breaks on Tuesday, and now it's fixed by Wednesday, I'm not allowed to bring I have to be makdish another animal. Okay? Why? Because you'll Ba'alei Chaim are nidachin. So that's a machlokas. You can see the little gimel next to Rav's shita that Ba'alei Chaim einon nidachin. This is quoted in the Rambam and seems to be how we paskin. Meisvei, we have a question on this.
But ein nidachin meaning what? Meaning that they cannot be pushed off.
Ba'alei Chaim,
or they can't be pushed
Ba'alei Chaim are einon nidachin. They don't get ruined because the mizbeach got ruined. So if I was makdish my animal on Tuesday, on Monday, and the mizbeach was chaser on Tuesday, the workers came in and fixed it by Wednesday, Rav Yochanan would say that's a problem because Ba'alei Chaim are nidachin, they do get postponed and pushed off. Ma'ashein Kain, according to Rav, nope, you can't. Animals don't get ruined just because the mizbeach got ruined. That's what einon nidachin mean. They don't get ruined. So says the Gemara. Wait 1 second, Meisvei, we have a kasha. Kol hakodshim shehayu ad shelo nivna hamizbeach ve'achar kan nivna hamizbeach psulin. Let's say I was a very excited Jew, and today I'm makdish animals for the Beis Hamikdash. Unfortunately, we don't have a Beis Hamikdash. So if I'm makdish an animal, and ve'achar kach nivna hamizbeach, and tomorrow, please God, the Beis Hamikdash is built, I cannot use those animals for the mizbeach. Nivne dechuyin me'ikaraninu. What seems to be the case is that had it been that it was nivne, I should say, when we build it, we see that that's dechuyin me'ikara. What do we see? No, you don't shech them. Right, whatever you do with them. Maybe it's probably grazing until they, ro'at she'istayit. But let's say I was makdish that animal, I cannot bring it on the mizbeach. So we do see, Kasha and Rav, we do see that Baalei Chaim are nidachin. So says the Gemara, Ella, ad shelo neheras hamizbeach. You're right. It's not about contrasting from before the Beis Hamikdash was built to after, but rather it's when the first Beis Hamikdash was destroyed. Here's the flow of events. I was makdish an animal one day before Bayis Rishon was destroyed. 70 years later, when Bayis Sheni was built, I brought my animal. So that's our question. Do we say that Baalei Chaim are nidachin or not? It's a new Beis Hamikdash. It's totally new. I was makdish the animal before the destruction of the first, and I brought the animal after the second. Says the Gemara, what are you talking about? Neheras, when the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, ha'izkin luhu. These animals are so old. They're 70 years old. First of all, animals don't usually live that long. Second of all, we don't bring 70-year-olds on the mizbeach. That's not how it works. The animals are 1 year, 2 years. They have to be ben shana. There's like a lot of rules, so that doesn't work. So therefore, the Gemara concludes, Ella, ad shelo nifgam hamizbeach, ve'achar kam nifgam hamizbeach, psulin. What we see over here is that ad shelo nifgam hamizbeach, I was makdish an animal, and then ve'achar kach nifgam hamizbeach, and then it got fixed. The halacha is that it's puzzle. Oh, so it's puzzle that shows you again that Baalei Chaim are nidachin. Kasha and Rav. Says the Gemara, below Terutzi come into Rasa, didn't you just piecemeal and tear apart this Mishnah to make it work? You couldn't tell if it was Neheras, you switched it to Nivne. Well, guess what? Ema shenishchatu. You're messing around with it. I'm going to mess around with it and say that the word should really be, instead of Shelo Neheras al Mizbech, I'll change it Ad Shelo Nishchatu al Mizbech, and then the question dissolves. However, the Gemara points out that there is an internal problem with Rav. Rav was of the opinion, as we just learned about, that Baalei Chaim are not nidachin. Hold on 1 second. Ve'omar Rav Gidal Amar Rav, Mizbeach shene'ekar, if the Mizbeach hapnimi was physically not where it should be, the halacha is maktirin ktores b'mekomo, that we still are maktir ktores on the footprint of where that Mizbeach should have been. And let's take a look at Rashi, who will help us understand this question. 4 lines from the bottom. Dibra maskal Mizbeach shene'ekar. B'mizbeach panimi kamayri. We're talking about the inner mizbeach. V'asal kadaita. I might have thought v'asal kadaita hu adin lechitzon. And says the Gemara, v'kasha derav aderav do amar leel kol hakadshim shenishchatu sham psulin. He said earlier that all of the kadshim that are nishchat on a mizbeach that's nifkam, he says they're puzzle. So Rav says in one breath that the mizbeach, the outer mizbeach was nifkam, and it's puzzle, but the inner mizbeach, if it's pashut missing, you still bring the ketores? That's not possible. You can't have such vastly different halachos. Says the Gemara, yes, you can. Keda Amar Rava, Mo dehaya Rabbi Yehuda b'damim. When it comes to damim, I agree. Now we don't know what this Rabbi Yehuda is. We weren't talking about Rabbi Yehuda. We're talking about Rav. So we'll soon see what Rabbi Yehuda is. But let's say over here, Hachanami Mo de Rav b'damim. Rav says, when is it that we say that? When is it that we say that kol hakadshim shenishchatu sham psulin, that if the Beis Hamikdash gets dinged and it's chaser in some way that it's not kosher? That's true in regards to zrikas hadam, but not ktoras. The ktoras can still be put in the footprint of the mizbeach that's broken, no problem at all. The outer mizbeach, where we're talking about zrikas hadam, no, that's where he draws the line. Now, we had just said that this Hachanami Modeh Rav B'damim was learned from Rabbi Yehuda. My Rabbi Yehuda, what case of Rabbi Yehuda was it where he focused on blood? So says the Gemara D'Tanya, Bayom Ahu Kidesh HaMelech Toch HaChatzer. Shlomo HaMelech was makdish the chatzer, was makdish the floor of the Beis HaMikdash, because Ki Mizbeach She'asa Moshe Katan Mehachil, because the Mizbeach that Moshe had built was too small. How do we understand this line of Katan Mehachil, that it's too small? Says the Gemara, Dvarim Kiksavan, Dibir Rabbi Yehuda. Yeah, it was Pasha too small, square footage. It was not a very big Mizbeach. The Mizbeach that Moshe had was much smaller than the one that we had in the Beis Hamikdash, which was 32 by 32 amos. We're going to be doing some math in a minute, so you can prepare yourselves. But before we get there, Amalei Rabbi Yossi, what are you talking about that the Mizbeach was smaller? V'alu kvar ne'emar, in regards to that mizbeach that you're calling so small, elef olos ya'ale shlomo al hamizbeach hahu, that mizbeach of Moshe that he was using, he did 1,000 korbanos on that mizbeach. V'ilu beveis olamim, but in the Beis Hamikdash, who Omer vayizbach Shlomo es zevach hashlamim asher zevach lashem bakar esrim u'shnayim elef. That's 22,000. Now, if you compare the size of the Beis Hamikdash, the size of the mizbeach of Moshe, which was initially 5 by 5, but let's look at this, 5 by 5, but we had to remove for the keren. So now that's 1 from each side. The 5 becomes 3. And there also had to be 1 amma of walking on each side. He had a 1 by 1. He had a 1 by 1 fire spot. And that 1 by 1 fire spot, he was able to burn 1,000 animals. Rashi here points out it was derech nes, not a normal thing. But our Beis Hamikdash was huge. The actual fireplace was about 20 by 20. So if a 1 by 1 can do 1,000, so then 20 1 by 1s can do a lot more. So the Gemara says, why did you have to? It's basically it's even more than 20 by 1,000. It ends up being, the Meforshim do the math here. If 1, let me do the math here again. Yeah, if 1 by 1 is 1,000 animals, so what's 20 by 20? That's 40. So 40 of them can do 400,000 animals. So then why did Shlomo have to be makdish the floor to do more shechting? So what he's bothered by is that, remember, that the Tanakama here said, Rabbi Yehuda said, Dvarim kiksavan, that really Moshe's mizbeach was just too small. Says the Gemara, it literally, the way you're talking, if we're doing a math equation of Moshe's 1 by 1 fire to Shlomo's 20 by 20 fire, 400,000 animals could be done in a day. Why did you have to do that to the floor? The outer mizbech was huge compared to, it was 40 times larger, 400 times larger. So therefore, says the Gemara, you didn't need to be makdish the floor. Ella, says the Gemara, Ella Rabbi Yossi Aglili, who just presented this argument against Rabbi Yehuda, he says, no, Ella, what mahu katan mehachil? It's just like a phrase. They might have both been very big, but really what it meant was ka'adam ha'omer lechavero ploni nanasu. This person is a dwarf. This person is a midget, as it translates, and what that means is he's puzzle for kahuna. We don't say he's puzzle for kahuna. Lashon sagi nahar. It's not such a lashon sagi nahar to call someone a dwarf. I'm just saying that's what ben nanas is. Ben nanas is someone whose body is malformed. They're not allowed to do the avoda. So says the Gemara, it's better to say that he's a ben nanas than to say that he's pasal avoda. Same thing by Moshe. It's better to say that the reason we're stopping to use his mizbech is because katan mehachil is too small. It's lashon sagi nahar. It's not about the math. It's just not nice. Okay. Rabbi Yehuda shapir kamar Rabbi Yossi. Okay, that's a very good argument that he says the math looks good. Says the Gemara, Rabbi Yehuda l'taime. Really, Rabbi Yehuda follows his own reasoning here as to why he said that Moshe actually had a smaller mizbeach. He said the math that you did is wrong. Follow along. Says the Gemara, a quarter of the way down on Nun Testament base. Rabbi Yehuda l'taime, the Omar mizbeach sh'asa Moshe gadol haya. He says, I'll tell you, you're right, it was smaller, but it was bigger than we just said. We just did the math that it was 5 by 5, and after removing space for the keren and space for the walkway, there was only a 1 by 1 space where you can do a fire. He says, that's not true. It was gadol, detanya, chamesh amos orach vechamesh amos rochav, dvarim kiksav divrei Rabbi Yossi. Really, there was 5 on each side of the halfway line. Really, the way to read this is that there's 5 quadrants. So if I have 5 quadrants that are 5 by 5, then I have a 10 by 10 fire. Well, that's a whole new ballgame. That's much bigger than 1 by 1. And Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Ne'emar kan Ravua, but Ne'emar Lahalan Ravua. He says, no, it's not like you just said Sorry, let me go back. I apologize. Let's go back to the Tanya. The Tanya, the Brisa reads like this: Chamesh amos orach v'chamesh amos rochav dvarim kiksavan dibri Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi held that Moshe's mizbeach was 5 by 5. Rabbi Huda argued. Rabbi Huda Omer ne'emar kan ravua v'ne'emar lahalan ravua. By our case, it says the word ravua, and in Sefer Yechezkel it says the word ravua. Malahalan me'emta iso hayamoded. When it comes to the measuring of the square of the ravua in Yechezkel, he was measuring from the midline. Afkan me'emta iso hayamoded. So too, by our case, we're measuring from the middle. So when it says that Moshe's mizbeach was 5, it really means that was one quadrant, and it was really 10 by 10. How do we know v'hasam in Sefer Yechezkel, v'hasam in Nolan, that we're talking about quadrants, that there's a ravua? The pasuk says over there, Ariel shtei mesrei ama l'chol ruach, 12 amos in every direction, which is 24 squares. So there we bring that same principle back, that the 5 amos of Moshe was really 10 by 10. The Brisa says halfway down, O Eino Ella, perhaps it's only Yud Beis al Yud Beis in Yechezkel when it says 12. No. Kshehu Omer El Arbas Riva'ov. Over there it says the 4 quadrants. That is how we properly understand that. And that's why Rabbi Yehuda says the math doesn't work. Because if he did 1,000 on the Mizbeach that he had, and you multiply, it would only come out to 11,000 on the larger Mizbech. That's why Shlomo had to consecrate the floor to make it the appropriate level of Kedusha to do the Shechita. Good. So says the Gemara of Rabbi Yossi. What does Rabbi Yossi do with the Gzera Shava Ravua? If you look 1/3 of the way down, Rabbi Yossi was the one who used Ravua to teach us that Moshe's Mizbeach was actually 10 by 10. What does Rabbi Yossi do with those words, with the Gzera Shava Ravua? Rabbi Yossi, Ki Gomar Gzera Shava, Begova Hu de Gamir. He wasn't talking about the area, he was talking about the height. Titania. Beshalosh Amos Komaso, it was 3 amos tall. He says, Dvarim Kiksavanti Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yossi Omer, Ne'emar Kan Ravua, V'ne'emar Lahalan Ravua. Malahalan Govo Pishnaim Keorko, Afkan Pishnaim Keorko. He says that it's a 1-to-2 ratio. It is the height to the gova is pishnaim orko. The height is double the orech. Says the Gemara, Amrle Rabbi Yehuda, skipping the parentheses. Efshar kohen omer al gabe hamizbech ve'avoda biyado v'chol ha'am roen oso bachutz. If you're saying that the mizbech is taka that tall, that it's 10 amos tall because it was 5, right? If you remember, he uses the Gzera Shava for height, not for area. So now, if it was 5, now it's 10 tall. But the curtains, the walls, the curtains in the Mishkan were only 10 amos tall too. So it's pasnish. It's not right to watch the Kohen doing the avoda. It's not asur. It's just not right. It's not a coveted way to serve a Kadosh Baruch Hu with everybody watching you. So Amar lo Rabbi Yossi v'alo kvar nemar bes kilei hachatzer bes masach shar chatzer asher al mishkan al mizbeach ma mishkan yud amos af mizbeach yud amos. We know that the mishkan and the mizbeach were both the same height. And the second pasuk is v'omer kiloim chamesh esrei ama elakatev. Really, the Yerios were actually 15 and not 10, so they couldn't see him. We assume that the average person is, 4 amos. What is that? 6 feet? 3.5, 4 amos? So here the Gemara says, you're right, he was as tall as he was. The top of the Mizbeach was 10, and the curtains were 15. Ayuma Talmud Chamesh amos. Why did the pasuk say 5 if it meant something different? So says the Gemara, Misfas HaMizbeach u'lemala. Yeah, the curtains were 5 from the height of the Mizbeach, which is plus 10, which is 15. Why then does the pasuk say 3 was the height? Says the Gemara, Misfas sovev u'lemala. That 3 was being measured from the sovev. Look back at that Mishnah, the Brisa we learned a couple of days ago. We started with the base of 32, which was an amma by 32 by 32, and the next one was 30 by 5, and then we got up to there, and then the next 3 would bring us up to the top of the Mizbeach. With the Keren, it was 10. Rabbi Yehuda, Ki Gamir Gzera Shava Birachavu Huda Gamir, that we saw already, that he was actually measuring the footprint, the area. Rabbi Yehuda, according to Rabbi Yehuda's math, unfortunately, we still have a problem. Says the Gemara, according to Rabbi Yehuda's math, because he doesn't learn the same rule about the curtains that they were 15. So what does he do about the fact the Kohen can still be seen according to the math that he does because it's only 10 amos on the curtains. So if you're on top of the Mizbech, that's 10. he can be seen by the public. So says the Gemara, Nehida coin mischaze. You might see the top of the coin, but avoda de biyado lo mischaze. But you were not able to see the avoda that he was doing. It's okay to see his head, to see his shoulders. You're not allowed to see the actual avoda that he's doing. We'll stop right here at Bishlama, and Mir Hashem will pick up tomorrow night with Daf Samach. Wishing you all a beautiful night.